Hey class, it's Mr. Wilder coming to you live from my basement, and I want to talk to you a little bit about market failures today. Market failures and also how externalities and public goods kind of tie into that concept of market failures. So let's get this presentation started. First thing, I'd like to define market failures with you. A market failure is the market structures we've learned about recently, like oligopoly, monopoly, perfect competition, monopolistic competition. These could all be considered market failures because in one way or another they don't allocate goods and services in the most efficient way, meaning there's waste. So there are two forms of economic inefficiency we need to look at, and they are externalities and public goods. And we'll talk about both of those throughout our presentation today. Let's start with externalities. This is the idea that cost and benefits that spill over is the idea of an externality. So there's something good or something bad that spill over because of something that you are producing or something you are buying, consuming. So this idea of an externality, it's a side effect, that's another word for a spillover, of production or consumption that has consequences for the people other than the producer or the consumer. So let's see if we can make a little more sense of that. Here's an example of an externality. You can see this factory that is polluting the river, putting that kind of dirty sludge or whatever it is into the river. This is an example of an externality. Example 2 is this beautiful flower garden in your neighbor's yard. That's an example of an externality. And then we also have a loud party, which is the third example of an externality. All right, so within the idea of externality, these things that can happen that have some spillover effects, like we just said, there are basically two types of externalities, a positive externality and a negative externality. A negative externality is a cost that falls on someone other than the producer or the consumer. Okay, so the cost of it happening doesn't affect the producer or the consumer. It affects everybody else. The cost can be money or it can be some undesired effect. So it doesn't have to be money, but it can be some undesired effect. In examples 1 through 3, which one would you consider to be a negative externality? Let's think about that for a second. Well, numbers 1 and 3 would probably be your best examples of a negative externality. The factory polluting the river is creating a negative externality for all of those who live down the river from where it is dumping, potentially affecting their health. Okay, so everybody that lives down the river has to deal with that pollution. That's a negative externality for everyone else. It doesn't affect the factory. Okay, it doesn't affect people consuming the products that factory is making, but it certainly affects all the people that rely on that water down the river, that are further down the river. Okay. The other example of a negative externality is the loud party. It's a negative externality for neighbors trying to sleep and are being kept up by the noise. Okay, that's the cost for the neighbors. Now, I said there's two types of externalities. One is negative, one is positive. A positive externality is a benefit that falls on someone other than the producer or the consumer. Okay? So example 2 is an example of a positive externality. If you're a neighbor to the person with the flower garden, you get to enjoy the view they create without having to do any of the work. Of course, unless they put a fence up, so you can't see it anymore. But until they do, it's a positive externality. So the question is, why are externalities inefficient? What's the problem with them? Negative externalities tend to result in goods being overproduced because their true cost isn't reflected in the actual market price. Okay, so like that factory that is polluting the river, they'll keep producing their product because they're not paying the cost of that pollution. It's the people down the river that have to pay the cost for it. Right? If that cost for polluting the river went back to the factory, well, then they would start producing less. But since it's they're going to keep producing, and they might even produce more because it doesn't cost them any more to pollute the river. Positive externalities tend to result in goods being underproduced. Most companies will not produce more of a good or service unless they're getting more of a benefit from it. Okay? So why should I produce more of a product or a good if I'm not receiving the benefit from it? Or, like the example of the garden, why should I let you enjoy my beautiful garden if I did all the work to plant it? Okay? All right, so that's positive and negative externalities. We're going to jump into public goods now. What's the deal with those? Public goods are really simple to understand. They represent another way that our economy is inefficient. And I have a picture of these street lights here. They're a really good example of a public good. Okay. These are goods that are available to everyone, like the street lights. This means they are non-excludable. We can't keep other people from using those street lights even at the same time that we're using them. Okay, it doesn't matter how many cars are driving down the road. Everybody gets to use those streetlights. Okay, and nobody has to pay for them. Okay, consumption by one person does not prevent another from consuming it too. This is called non-rival consumption. And with public goods, you have this kind of age-old problem. It's called the free rider problem, where these goods basically have to remain public goods because no one can make any money off them. You know, if you could figure out a way to charge every person who drives by a streetlight a certain amount of money, you know, that'd be fine, but you can't. Okay, so we all pay the cost for it through taxes and whatever. But you know, if I use the streetlight more than anyone else, I don't pay any extra cost. Okay, that's the free rider problem. Okay, that'll do it for our slideshow today. I hope that helped explain positive and negative externalities. And also the concept of public goods. And have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.